Alright. Excuse me. We have two packages here. First, we've got the onesie. Yep. And then we've got the threesie. As in, there should be three in here. It's smaller than it should, but yeah, that's three. Okay. You know what? Let's begin with the one that we opened up first. A Nobody's Way Up to an Exploration Hero. Which is definitely an interesting looking cover. A lot of interesting characters. Sometimes I wonder if I'll go back and revisit the show. I never finished it. I didn't get terribly far into it. Let's see if I can remember exactly why. Mostly because I think there was some elements of some of the characters I didn't like. It was a little conveniently set up, maybe. Not necessarily bad, but just, I guess, narratively a little clunky, I thought. Regions A and B. So Japanese with English subtitles. So no dub. Which could make sense. If I remember correctly, like there was a betrayal at the very beginning, and you're like, okay, well, I would want to see. Is this even the? This is a different show. I'm thinking of something else. Nobody's. Okay. No wonder these characters didn't seem familiar. Okay, what the hell is that name of the other one? Because this one is very conveniently set up for him, because he just happens to get a rare card and happens to get another rare card, and I don't remember. I guess it was just way too convenient. Find your rare drop. Yeah, it's saying there on the back which one it is. Huh. Well then. Huh. Yeah. Why does nobody remember me in this world? Well, why can't I remember the name of that other damn anime? I never finished this one. This one I thought had an interesting setup. Did I not finish this? Probably I just got exhausted as it got close to its finale. I remember getting quite far, and there was interesting things set up about this. I see a region A, B. This one, if I remember, was dubbed. There's an English dub, Japanese subtitles, English subtitles. Forgotten but not powerless. Disc 1, Disc 2. Do I have any thoughts? This finish? What is this? Is this this is a complete season, so that implies it could be a season 2. What was this? This is also a complete season. Yeah, I guess I'm not surprised this one didn't end. It didn't seem like it had like a final goal per se. Just oh yeah, he got lucky, happened to find a rare drop and then another rare drop because of that kind of, I don't know. This one does feel like it has a final purpose. And it does make sense that there's more than one season, because while it felt like it could have potentially wrapped up in one season, if there's more than one season, it's because there was more it could do. Anyways, here's probably the better option. So we've been getting interestingly better, I thought. Wistoria Wand Sorcery, Season 1. This one calls itself Season 1. You know, unabashedly, it's like, yeah, there's more of this coming, and I think we all want more of this coming. Actually, this had really great stuff for Regions A and B. I think English with Japanese subtitles. Yeah. Or English and Japanese audio with English subtitles as an option. Lone Warrior in the World of Magic. If I were to describe this, so there's the anime Mashley, which is kind of similar to this in terms of, okay, he's not considered great at magic. And mashal, I don't know what to call it. That one is definitely, okay, he can't do magic, but he's in a magic school. And it's kind of a whimsical shonen, but this one is definitely telling a more serious and interesting story. You know, that graphic looks like it would be better to just look at properly. I'm going to look at it proper. Intriguing. Now let's be careful about putting this in, because I do feel like it's not lined up correctly and don't want to bend it. It's usually where I don't look at them, but that was an interesting image that I don't think I could see through the plastic too well. Why am I not remembering how to describe this? I just remember being satisfied as it went. Anyways, last but not least, Leiji Matsumoto's Queen Millenia. Complete TV series. Sentai. Which I do believe this is something I actually don't have, and so I didn't get fooled by Sentai re-releasing something. Although I didn't, now I think about it, I didn't check, but whatever. Region A, Japanese with English subtitles. Includes all 41 episodes, plus special episode on 5 discs. Which unfortunately don't have, like, images of the anime characters. I usually really like to see those, but that's some interesting scenery on all of them. I'm not as familiar with the show, but I do believe it's probably got some good vintage to it. Anyways, here's this week's physical anime collection update. Okay, there we go. In between moving the camera around, I checked, and it was Given the Worthless Appraiser Class. That was the other anime I was thinking of. Yeah, so they're both, I guess, their titles about worthless people, and it's interesting how my brain mixed those up. But oh well, let's put that aside. I guess the first thing we'll talk about is, with my Friday friend, we watched the Overlord, the Sacred Kingdoms movie, and I was actually quite pleased with it. Especially since, you know, if you compare it to a lot of other, I guess, one-off things, like I think there was the Reincarnated as a Slime movie about Crimson Blood or something like that. I thought this was quite good. Now, the truth of the matter is, I think it's an adaptation from a chapter in the manga or something. And it's also possible that even in there it was a side story, but it's also maybe, I guess, something that feels like it doesn't need to necessarily be told, but it is fun to have it be told. So, what I mean by that is, usually with something like that, like Crimson Bonds, they nodded to it in the latest season of Reincarnated as a Slime by just having some of the characters appear in kind of one-off background scenes, but it not really having anything to do with the plot. And I feel like the events of this one can be referenced as something that the show could have already been pretending was something that happened in the background. But the fact that there's an entire movie or story arc that allows you to go and see that is, there. So it feels like it's a little more potentially integrated than the other stories, which just look like an excuse to kind of have things happening, I guess. But I think it also played off to a lot of strengths of Overlord. In particular, Overlord, beyond like its very beginning, is kind of more entertaining from the perspective of the world experiencing our main character. And I feel like this movie not only brings that, but it kind of brings it in a freshly different perspective than anything we've seen in the show thus far. Like, we've seen how certain characters come to be allies with him in one way or another, and that included, like, probably one of the more neat and interesting ones from the TV series would be that one lady that was a big leader in the underground stuff that our main character took care of when when even her minions are like, he's just using the old carrot and a stick approach, blah 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 blah, and it's just sort of like you can feel her being manipulated, but not exactly manipulated at the same time. It's sort of like, you know, that interaction with her and relating to her is just neat. That's a scene that's fun to go back to because it's just like the way Ainz puts stuff in terms of what it means for somebody to be in charge and what it means to acknowledge somebody being in charge. You know, it's something where it's just like, it is very nice to hear, very great to hear. Just it does give him a weight of feeling very, I guess, wise. Probably helps that the voice actor carries it really well. But, you know, that point is, you know, this movie contains a lot of that sort of stuff. It doesn't feel like it's necessarily repeated stuff. You can sort of feel what's going on, but it all works because it's mostly told from the point of view of the Squire girl. And it is very interesting to see things from her perspective. Even if we know when certain things are up, for example, but just kind of the look on her face as she's pondering things he says and things he does. It's interesting. There were very funny moments related to, yeah, I'm not going to spoil that. There were some creature designs that were like intriguing, unexpected, and like, actually that's kind of cool. The prince, for example, was kind of cool. The demon was I don't know how else to put it. That demon was pretty cool. That other thing that I think they called it demon, I don't remember. I don't want to say too much. I thought there were a lot of cool designs. And I thought that the ending would be different than what it was. But what it was, I think, was better. Because I feel like it integrates better into the main story with the way the TV series has been working without being too intrusive about it, and it still provides something that's just like an interesting contrast behind all this stuff. Now, I see it's not rated as highly as a TV series, so I guess not everybody else liked it as much, but I definitely saw a lot about it to appreciate. I guess there's a good question of whether or not I would go and rewatch it. That might be a good evidence. I think there are scenes in there that would probably be fun to go back and see again. And maybe people didn't like it because it feels very gaslighty. And we're seeing the point of view of a character and we're like, yeah, there's no way they're not being gaslit to some degree. And maybe people don't like that as much. But I guess that might be a difference between me. It's because, honestly, I think she probably has a perfectly fine future in a kind of bleak way, really. But anyways, I digress. Anyways, other stuff. Also with the Friday Friend, we watched Kaiju number 8, season 2, episode 19. I think I complained about this a little bit last week, but, you know, rewatching again, it's just like, okay, the problem I have with this episode isn't that what's happening isn't necessarily not cool. It's just that from a storytelling perspective, it feels like it's separated itself a little bit from what it should be about. And the title of the show tells you it should be about Kaiju number 8. And of course, you know, I went on and watched episode 20 this weekend, and you know, there was more of the same in there. But it wrapped that up, and then it went back to stuff relating to our titular character, Kafka Hibino, aka Kaiju number 8. So I'm glad that it did. I'm just trying to remember what specifically happened. And unfortunately, my Friday Friend is going on a little bit of a trip, so we're probably not going to rewatch the next episode or the previous episode So he'll get to watch a batch of them when he comes back from that. But I'm not sure what to think, other than I was just glad it returned to that sort of stuff. Oh well, fine stuff. Let me see. Reborn as a Vending Machine, Season 2, Episode 10. I wasn't looking forward to this episode. It looked like it was just kind of an excuse to... Oh, yeah, here's all of these cute girl characters put in there. Kind of like a spiritually along the same lines as a Hot Springs episode or a Swimsuit episode or whatever. And to a certain degree it was. But, you know, it still had little moments in there that were still entertaining. And it ended on a note which is like, okay, now it's leading into whatever this season finale is intending to be. I guess we'll have to see in the next episode exactly what that is, but, okay. Better than I would have thought. Clavatus, Episode 10. Let's see. Holy shit. Yeah, we had that happen, didn't we? We got that information. That information. Still not sure what to think, because I hope this show isn't a couple episodes away from resolving, because if it is, then there's something about it that feels like it would just be a little short, but I'm not quite sure what it would mean for it to have to be longer. Anyways, yeah, a lot of interesting stuff happened in there, and I guess setting up for hopefully not a series finale, but a season or a core finale or something like that. Onmyo Kaiten Rebirth Verse, Episode 10. I guess we got more of the show doing what it's been setting up the past couple of episodes to show us what it's really doing. Okay stuff, I think. But not sure what else to say about it other than I guess want to see it ending. Whatever that means. Rising of the Shield Hero, Season 4, Episode 9. Okay, yeah. This wasn't the one with the interesting battles in it. Just, I guess, stuff set up for what it's going to do next. Okay, I guess. Reincarnated as the Seventh Prince, Season 2, Episode 21. Okay, we had Mega Meat, and that was just a fun character. That was just fun. What else did we have? I don't remember. I only remember Mega Meat. Okay. Welcome to the Outcast Restaurant, Episode 10. Was a little trepidatious about this because it sounded like a recap. I'm like, why do we need recap? This show hasn't done enough to feel like we need to recap. But it was actually the antagonist's recap, I guess. And it's just like, okay. Some of this stuff, I guess it just is. It sort of feels slightly info-dumpy. I don't know how much I cared for it. But, yeah. I guess it's setting up for whatever it's about to do at the end of this show. So fine. Dan to Dan Season 2, Episode 22. Wasn't that one? What was it? That. So it went back to some of the stuff related to just awkward teenagers who like each other. Are they teenagers? I think so. I'm just trying to remember if maybe they're not high school, maybe they're middle school. Hard to say. I don't know. But, you know, just some of that awkward stuff. But they had other funny things mixed in there. And I guess they're setting up for whatever they're planning to do for this season finale. Unless this is supposed to be a series finale. I'm not sure if thematically it feels like it would be, but anyways, funny stuff. Interesting stuff. Dan to Dan being weird, but, you know, entertaining. Water Magician, Episode 9. Let's see. I feel like it was a doing stuff episode. One of the things that kind of surprised me is Episode 8 had set up, okay, you're going to be doing this other thing. Oh, well, I guess you'll be doing that in a couple days so you can go off on this other expedition, which... Yeah, okay, that happened. Okay. I'm trying to think if anything super noteworthy happened because of all that, but for the most part, I guess it was just weird because it sort of felt like if he was already going to go on this other thing and that's a couple days away, how can he go on an adventure somewhere else? And it sounds like the timing for all of that only worked because, oh yeah, I guess we were a little bit better at traveling faster than we would have thought. So kind of just a weird episode. Lots of neat little things in it, but weird. Dr. Stone Science Future Season 4 Part 2 Episode 21. Entertainingly shonen-y, action-y sort of stuff in that Dr. Stone style. Guess we'll have to see what happens after that. Fine stuff, I guess. Secrets of the Silent Witch, unfortunately, was a recap episode, so it was episode 9.5 this week. And it's unfortunate because, kind of wanted to see where it's about to go from what it's at. But, it was neat to go back and rewatch stuff. And since I was on PTO this week, like I mentioned, I did spend a little more time just going back and rewatching scenes from it. It's been a nice series. A little more standout than I would have guessed based on the premise at the very beginning. Good stuff. Shy Hero and the Assassin Princesses, Episode 10. I think some interesting, serious sort of stuff set up. From a relationship perspective, and yes, that happened. And that's happening. Okay. So, entertaining, I'd say. The Summer Hikaru Died, Episode 9. Okay, yeah, a couple of interesting elements in this show interacting, which I wasn't quite sure if they would, because I thought it would have more of a horror bent, but now I'm not quite sure what entirely it's doing, because there's still a horror element to it, but it's not doing it in the way I would have thought. So, it's continuing to be entertaining, I would say. Ugly Mug Epic Fighter, Episode 10. I was a bit worried because it kind of revealed that for some reason a lot of people that are main character knows isekai, which made me wonder, did everybody get isekai'd? And not sure what else to say. Okay, stuff, I guess. Minogra, Episode 10. Minogra? I think I pronounced that right. I think this episode introduced what the season is planning to end with, and it introduced some more interesting things where it's just like I said, one of the things that's been really neat about it is it's an isekai take, and most isekais, if they're not just pure medieval fantasy like Water Magician, usually they take their inspiration from JRPG video games to some degree. Whether it's an MMORPG where people kind of have stat menus. I mean, even plenty of straight up non-isekai fantasy stuff likes to do that. But again, this one is leaning on the 4X. And this episode leans on that element more strongly than many of the previous ones. Which says a lot, because I feel like it kind of has. And again, they're setting up for what's probably going to be the finale of the season, and so I'd say it was overall a pretty great episode. Good lead up to whatever it's going to probably end with. Hopefully not the end of the show, because I feel like there's room for it to explore more stuff. Hopefully only a core one, and there's a core 2 maybe coming up, maybe if after break, I don't know. Good stuff. Gotcha. Kuta, Episode 9. Okay episode, I guess. My main problem with it is mostly just that it's kind of doing some world building stuff that is kind of relevant to what our characters are going to be doing, but it's also a little bit of a distraction from that. More of a, it's more about them kind of celebrating the counterculture set up in the world itself, and to some degree it's okay, but at the same time I also can't help but worry a little bit, because this episode started leaning more heavily on the idea that, by the way, this is also a show about how wasteful those people on the sphere are. But I also kind of feel like graffiti arting stuff also is kind of encouragement of wastefulness to a degree. Like, I know there's an element of it that's an expression of oneself, and that's what the episode's leaning on, and that's why it doesn't completely fail, but it also feels like it's like, you know, there's all these cans of paints and spray cans and brushes and stuff, and not everything just like lasts forever. In fact, even the paints themselves, you could say, are kind of, when used in excess over and over and over again, are kind of bad. Like if you imagine a place that just keeps getting painted over and over and over, and every time it rains, the paints, you know, run on. Well, hopefully, you know, they would be paints that are very natural and can be washed and stuff like that. But isn't there also worry about like paints that have leads or weird stuff in them, and things that we think may be are safe now, but 10 years from now we may be like, oh, turns out these sterilize all of the local lizards and only the hamsters can live through it. You know, something weird like that. And I'm like, it feels like the show's being a tiny bit selective. Again, not in a way that I think ruins the episode, but in a way that's just like, okay, as long as you don't focus on that too much, because the thing I'm more interested in is seeing our main character, like 3 aspects of the main character that are all kind of correlated related, but I want to see him get his fucking revenge. Oh well. And then finally we have Sword of the Demon Hunter, Season 1, Part 2, Episode 22, which is definitely setting itself up for something that's not a core finale, but definitely something that's like, alright, that's a big thing. And we know, based on the setup of the show, that it can't be the final thing because of the fundamental premise of the show, but at the same time, it does feel like it's setting up something pretty big to end this season on. Interestingly enough, I pointed out how in the previous episode there were clear, not really animation errors so much as animation incompleteness, I guess. And I feel like this episode had tiny peaks like that. Little things were just like, guess you can tell that he did a flip there. It has these characters talking, but the camera's instead panned over the neat scenery. But definitely not as bad as the previous episode. My guess would be that they're saving a lot of their budget for these last 3 episodes, and that's why last week's episode was suffering a little bit. A little bit. It wasn't too bad. You could kind of tell, okay, yeah, this is just the outline of the room that they're in, but they didn't fill it in. You could try to pretend it's artistic, except that sometimes the shading and coloring is not consistent. Maybe you can come up with a reason for why, oh yeah, this episode was actually all a dream and it's all in his head from this point on to the rest of the show. Just don't feel like you can really get away with that, but overall, episode 22, I think interesting, entertaining things happening. Not sure what else to say about it. So, if I have anything else to talk about, let's see, I don't think I have anything to say about Dead by Daylight. I guess we had the PTB. I have to admit, the thing about the PTB that disappointed me the most wasn't the things that were in there that didn't work out. It was really the community's response to a whole lot of it. I don't remember if maybe I tried to talk about this last week or not. And I don't think so. I think it came out this past week while I was on PTO, so I got a chance to play with a little bit of it, but not enough to really say that I did anything too thorough. I think there are some very valid complaints in there, but my disappointment in the community is people running too far with so many things. So if I were to come up with examples, I mean, like they were like, oh, this is the way behavior wants killers to play, and it's like the killer is just another survivor, and it's just like, you know, it felt overdone. Like people didn't care that they were, like, usually with a joke like that, you want to make sure it's kind of acknowledged that you're deliberately saying something that's a bit overboard, but it's not actually the case. But people just overplayed this stuff so much that it was hard not to be disappointed in the community, because it's like, I know that they don't understand their game and their game balancing too well, but you had a bunch of dumbasses saying, oh, they never listen to people's feedback with the PTB and they always go live with them. It's like, I've been around long enough to know that there's a couple of PTBs that they just completely abandoned. The Slug rework, the Twin rework, or at least the previous Twin rework, the first Pyramid Head rework. You know, they're playing with stuff to see if they work, and while there are things that don't work, sometimes the things that they're going live with that don't work are still digestible, and some of the elements of this just weren't, because like my biggest problem with the changes isn't necessarily everything they did to try to counter tunneling. It's just that they had this big long list of stuff that's just like, how the fuck is anybody supposed to keep track of this? Usually I'm pretty good at this, and I couldn't even remember, okay, wait, why is that effect happening and not that effect happening? And how is a new player supposed to know all this shit? Even if the game's telling them, the game's already telling them too much stuff. They really need something that's conceptually simpler, in my opinion, which I can agree, you know, maybe you can't get simpler and do that, but I've seen some evidence that people have ideas that surprisingly come from the Dead by Daylight board game, which actually solves some of the problems. And that looks like a better direction to lean, because that creates rules for both sides that are just, these are the rules, and not here's rules, but here's a big long list of exceptions that will sometimes give you buffs, sometimes penalize you for not playing a certain way. It's like, no, we want to encourage people to want to play the correct way. And how do you deal with tunneling? Well, obviously you need to make it where somebody can get hooked more than twice and not die. You need to make it where, yes, the killer can do that, but they don't really get anything for doing it. There's more for them to do by finding and hooking more people. And it's easy to bitch and moan, groan, and complain about that stuff. And, you know, I shouldn't pretend that I even know how to do this, but I will say that those ideas sound a lot better and more workable. Something that's a little more tricky to put in the game, because for them it's like, well, I can see why trying to change that would just be hard. But, you know, it still doesn't change the fact that I feel like people went way overboard with some of the stuff way too much. I guess two of the things I didn't like with Michael Myers' rework, like, conceptually I could see some stuff that maybe needs to be tweaked a little bit, but the community reaction to it. So I thought it was kind of funny when people like had Chucky wearing the Myers mask. It's like, hey, I'm the shape guy. You know, and you're supposed to hear Chucky's voice in your head when you're saying, hey, I'm the shape guy. Don't fuck with the Myers, or something like that. And, you know, that's kind of funny, but it just kept going more and more, and it wasn't, because the idea is they wanted to say, oh, look, Chucky has a dash attack, this slash and dash mode. Oh, look, they gave that to Myers as well. Well, I think some people are right that it seems weird to call it that. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the point is, there's a big difference. When Myers is doing that, it's supposed to be something very similar to what he already does. He already has a longer lunge. And this is basically saying, all right, we don't want to try to do anything changing that element of him, so we're going to lean a little bit more into that. And I think what they did is a better direction in that regard. People say, oh, it's not lore accurate. Sound like fucking idiots. Anyways, the point is, people say, oh, he's lost his identity, but I feel like what this rework does is it leans into his Dead by Daylight identity more. And maybe people say that brings him further away from the lore. I kind of disagree, because I feel like they've been focusing on only one thing, which is, like with this, him running forward with a knife thing. It's like, oh, Chucky also has a knife like that, so they're the same. They're conceptually very different. Chucky's is very much like a dash. It's something that sends him careening forward. It's supposed to have more than just, oh, I'm going to hit somebody. It's also potentially supposed to be map crossing, which they've nerfed quite a bit. And so there's a question of how much of a dash it still is, but it still has mechanisms that are just like, you're supposed to point him forward, and deal with the difficult mechanisms. And in that regard, I guess you could say, well, does that mean Pig has a dash? And I'm not sure if that is a dash as much anymore. It's hard to say, because there's definitely an element where Myers is more like what Pig is doing. But the difference is his is designed to be an extended lunge. You know, it's not exactly that, but the point is it's supposed to be way more menacing than anything anybody else could do. Everybody else is a game you're playing around to prevent yourself from getting down to a health state. With Michael Myers, the shape, it's supposed to be the most menacing thing he can do outside of the rework to his I can just instantly kill somebody mechanism. Which I also have to say is actually a lot nicer, because it leans more into his DVD lore, where he's supposed to be one of the killers that can kill even though the entity doesn't normally allow it. But, you know, you had to do that with add-ons, whereas now he doesn't need the add-ons. And I think that leans into that idea that he is just the shape of evil more. And so maybe it feels like it goes a little way from more, but again, it means that he's more dangerous. He is the shape of evil. He's just evil. And I think in that regard, it's actually pretty decent. And what they've done with the add-ons, I thought was pretty decent as well. I especially like the fact that even though they've completely nerfed the Vanity Mirror Myers concept, which was a replacement for the Scratch Mirror Myers concept, Scratch Mirror Myers buffed enough that it can probably function in current DVD if it goes live with Myers as he is now. But I don't know. I think the biggest word that just kind of had me irritated by all that stuff is the word dash slop. Which, the idea is they're trying to say, oh, behavior doesn't know what to do, so they just put a dash on everybody. It's like, Pig already had that dash billion years ago because it was just the thing she could do. They just leaned into it more, so you can't really call that dash slop. Every time a new killer comes out that can dash, they just say, oh, they're just being lazy and adding a dash. It's like, yeah. Or they could do what you suggest and say, oh, they'll just be lazy and add a fucking teleport. And the reason I'm pissed off about a lot of that is because this word dash slop seemed to come out of nowhere. Everybody seemed to be echoing it like a bunch of fucking lemmings. And it reminds me of another word, brain rot. But the difference is, brain rot, I think, is actually a really good word because it's self-describing. It is a good word for what it represents because it sounds like the word itself is born from the thing that it is, and that kind of makes it funny. I also think it applies here because it feels like people using the word dash slop, unironically, are suffering from brain rot. That's my feeling anyways, and the problem is people couldn't shut up without continuing to be idiots. So I was more disappointed in the Dead by Daylight community than I was with behavior, even though behavior had elements of this patch that were definitely, I wouldn't even say overtuned, they were just badly designed. It's not the first time. Their first anti-slugging stuff, badly designed. This stuff, a lot better. I think I agree with people one way or the other about whether or not it's a good final thing to have, but it's not objectively bad like the previous anti-slug rework. I think it leans better into a lot of DVD's existing stuff. And then there's just a question of, I guess, can it be better worked? Can it be done better? And maybe, but I think people don't give behavior enough credit. There's a lot of fucking great ideas that happened in this patch. A lot of them were also kind of out there, maybe not as good, but I don't know, people like to criticize them. And sometimes they deserve some of their criticism, but sometimes people are just way too entitled. And again, the entire idea, let's rework Michael Myers by making him a teleport killer. And whether or not that actually allows them to do anything, makes him viable, whether or not that's even plausible the way they want it to be done. You know, they may as well be saying, well, why didn't they make Xenomorph crawl around on the walls and do leaps across the map like it does in Alien vs. Predator? And at a certain point, I don't think people appreciate what it means to work on a game engine, what it means to work on a game, keeping things within... Like, I don't think people appreciate just how much effort has to go into developing, especially developing something that has such a big fundamental base. You can say spaghetti code's like, sure, fine. And if you're willing to not get any licenses for 2 years, maybe they can clean up that spaghetti code. Sometimes it takes that fucking long. And that's also why, like at my company, I'm dealing with code that was written 20 years ago because it's so fundamental to basic stuff that if we were to try to change it, we'd probably break the way things we didn't expect work. And while we're trying to move things over to another thing, at some level it's still dependent on that one little guy over there. So it's kind of harder to remove stuff like that than you might think. It's hard to unspaghetti the code. You can say, oh, everybody just need to be good from the get-go. It's like, yeah, get a fucking time machine and go fix it for them. But that's not the way the world works. I don't know. Sorry that I guess this became a venting session. Hopefully y'all found that kind of entertaining. And if y'all kind of disagree with my thoughts, I think that's fair. Like, I'm trying not to go into this thinking that I'm right, everybody else is wrong. But it doesn't change the fact that even if I think that, I feel like people have overblown a whole lot of stuff to such a negative degree that, honestly, I just didn't feel like firing up Dead by Daylight these past 3 or 4 days. I got to the end of the Rift and I'm like, even the blood points from 2v8 don't mean much to me. I would probably join and play with somebody. And I do want to go in and play things here and there. But, yeah. I don't know. And remember, evaluate a lot of that stuff not as, oh, how dare the community. Remember to evaluate that as just me. Right? Now, maybe that also means there's something wrong with the community, but it's better not to think of it that way. I've been blabbering on. Which reminds me, I was just going to say, I'm really glad firing up VR chat just to see if my old avatar still works. And it looked like all the functionality was still working as I left it. So kudos to, I don't remember the name of the people doing VR chat. Unity? I know Unity owns it and it's kind of an advertising platform for VR chat. But kudos to the people for releasing updates. And I haven't logged in since before they did some sort of major rework with constraints so that there's now a VR chat constraint. If you don't know what that is, you don't have to worry about that. If you do know what that is, then maybe you could comment on it. But I appreciate the fact that my constraint-heavy avatar with a lot of neat little tricks that I've built into it just over all my years at VR chat, it still does everything I would want it to do. In fact, if anything, there are a couple of small little tweaks I could make to it to improve. And, you know, I can appreciate how much work they've done just to keep things working there. So that's something to be thankful of. Alright, there we go. My venting session is finally complete. Ending on that positive note. Y'all, have a nice week.